The engine had defeated 3 senior engineers over 11 days. It sat dead in the center of the workshop like a curse nobody wanted to inherit, and the biggest race of the year was 72 hours away. Then Mason arrived. He had not been assigned to it. He had no authority to touch it. He was only a general maintenance mechanic, a single father working the floor to keep his 6-year-old daughter fed and sheltered. But he sat down beside that engine in the middle of the night, listened to it the way other men listen to a person they love, and fixed it in 8 hours. The following morning, CEO Evelyn called him to her office and fired him for unauthorized interference with company property. She did not know that Mason had designed that engine himself. Press play because the man they dismissed as invisible was the one who built everything they were proud of. Mason's apartment was the kind of place that told a story without a single photograph on the wall. Small, clean, and arranged with a precision that had nothing to do with poverty and everything to do with a man who had learned to carry only what was necessary. The kitchen counter held exactly 2 mugs. The bookshelf held manuals, not novels, and in the corner, near the supply closet, pinned with a single thumbtack, was a piece of paper folded into quarters, a technical drawing of some kind, the lines too fine and deliberate to be anything casual. Mason never explained it to anyone who came over, and almost nobody came over. Luna was 6 years old, and already accustomed to mornings that moved on a schedule. She sat at the kitchen table with her stuffed bear, a small brown thing shaped like a gear wheel that she had named Cog, propped against her orange juice glass, as though it needed a front-row seat to breakfast. She wore the same pair of star-print socks every Monday, because she claimed Mondays required lucky socks, and Mason had never once argued with that logic. "Are you coming home early today?" she asked, not looking up from her toast. Mason set her lunchbox on the counter and thought about the answer with the same care he gave most things. "I'll try," he said. That was the answer he gave most often. Not a promise, not a dismissal. Just an honest acknowledgement that the world between leaving and returning held more variables than any man could fully control. Luna accepted it the way she accepted most things her father said, with a slow nod, and the quiet trust of someone who had never been let down enough to doubt him. He tied her shoes before she left for the neighbor's care, pulling the laces taut with a particular tension, not too tight and not loose enough to come undone mid-stride. For a fraction of a second, his mind calculated the friction coefficient of the knot against the material of her laces. Then he stopped himself and looked away, the way a man looks away from a mirror he does not want to face too early in the day. Vortex Motorsport occupied 4 city blocks on the east side of the industrial district, a gleaming compound of glass and steel that the late Richard Vance had built from a single workshop and a refusal to accept that American racing could not compete with European engineering. The company was now worth $2 billion. It employed 412 people, operated in 6 countries, and had won more championship titles than its founder had ever allowed himself to predict out loud. Evelyn Vance had inherited it 18 months ago, 2 weeks after her father's death, when she was 28 years old and still learning what it meant to be in a room where everyone waited for her to speak first. Mason had joined 3 months prior. His application listed 9 years of general mechanical experience, 2 references that checked out, and nothing else. No university degree, no professional certifications beyond the standard safety requirements. He had listed his previous employer as a small independent garage in Ohio that no longer existed. The hiring manager had flagged it as thin. Cameron, the chief operating officer who sat on the hiring committee that quarter, had approved it without comment. Mason was assigned to the lower workshop, the basement level, where the ventilation was weakest and the floor vibrated when the fabrication presses ran above. It was the kind of post that experienced mechanics requested transfers away from within 3 months. Mason had not requested anything. He showed up, did the work assigned to him, and spent whatever quiet time remained walking the perimeter of the ground floor, looking at the cars the way a person looks at old family photographs. His colleagues had taken to calling him the quiet one, and then simply the quiet guy, and eventually just the guy on level 2 because he spoke rarely, and when he did, it was almost always about a mechanical problem and almost never about himself. But occasionally, when he placed his palm flat against the body of a vehicle and closed his eyes for a moment, the way a doctor places a hand on a chest to feel what instruments cannot fully translate, something moved through his expression that, nobody down on the lower level could quite name. It was not concentration. It was closer to recognition. The crisis announced itself on a Monday morning with the sound of Isaac, the lead engineer, a 45-year-old MIT graduate with 20 years of competition-level mechanical experience, sitting down very slowly in his chair and saying nothing for nearly a full minute. The GT7's fuel injection system had failed in a way that did not exist in any technical manual, at any version, from any manufacturer. The failure was in the tertiary pressure delivery sequence, a cascade malfunction that the diagnostic software identified as impossible given the current system configuration, which was its way of admitting that it had no idea what was wrong. Isaac had spent 3 days on it. A pair of external consultants flown in from the German manufacturer had examined it, spoken to each other in low voices, and flown home without delivering a solution. Cameron called an emergency meeting on Wednesday afternoon. His voice in those meetings was always the same, deliberate, controlled, and carrying a faint undertone of patience with people who were not keeping up. The options, as he laid them out, were 2: postpone the race entry or substitute the vehicle. Both would cost money. Both would cost reputation. The only question was how much of each the company was willing to absorb. Evelyn said neither. She said it simply, without raising her voice, the way her father used to end certain discussions. Cameron looked at her for a moment longer than necessary, then wrote something in his notebook. Mason heard the entire exchange through the ventilation grate in the ceiling of the lower workshop. He was sitting on an overturned crate, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, looking upward at nothing in particular. When the voices above went quiet and the meeting ended, he stayed where he was for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, to no one, tertiary pressure valve, secondary seal ring. They've never read the original drawing. Luna asked him that evening, while he read to her from a picture book about machines, why gears needed each other. He paused longer than the question required. Then he said, because alone, a gear is just metal. When they mesh together, that's when they create motion. Luna considered this with great seriousness, adjusted her grip on cog, and was asleep within 4 minutes. Mason sat beside her for a while after her breathing slowed, then carried the book to the kitchen table, turned to a blank page at the back, and began to draw. Not slowly, not uncertainly, his hand moved across the paper with the speed and precision of someone transcribing something they already knew by heart. The lines were fine and technical, and absolutely exact. He worked until midnight without looking up. At 2 in the morning, he drove back to the facility. His Level 2 access card worked on the building entry he was registered for overnight maintenance rotation, and the card did not distinguish between basement-level access and upper workshop access. The GT7 bay had a yellow tape line across the entry and a sign that read, Restricted Authorized Engineers Only. Mason stepped over the tape without breaking stride. He did not bring unusual tools. He opened his standard-issue kit on the floor beside the car and began from the outside in, removing panels in an order that was not documented anywhere in the current maintenance protocol, because the current maintenance protocol was 3 generations removed from the original design logic. He worked from memory, not the uncertain memory of someone trying to recall a procedure, but the memory of someone who wrote the procedure in the first place. The tertiary pressure valve housing came apart in his hands the way it was meant to. He found the secondary microseal ring, a component so small and so specific that it was not listed in any version of the parts manifest that currently existed in the company's inventory system because Mason had added it by hand to the physical assembly before the first test run and had never formally documented it, intending to do so later. Later had not come. He replaced the seal with a component from a cross-referenced part number he kept memorized, reassembled the housing in reverse sequence, and ran a manual pressure check using the analog gauge on the wall, a gauge that most of the current engineering staff did not know how to read, because it predated the digital diagnostic system by 15 years. At 6:47 in the morning, the GT7's engine turned over and ran. The idle was smooth. The pressure readings were exact. Mason wiped his hands on a shop rag, packed his kit, and went to the lower workshop to start his regular shift. Dominic found him there at 7:15. The workshop chief was 58 years old, built like a man who had spent 4 decades lifting things that were too heavy and refusing to admit it, and he had a look on his face that Mason had not seen in a long time, the look of a man who has just confirmed something he suspected and is not certain whether to feel relieved or afraid. Dominic said nothing. He looked at the GT7 across the floor. Then he looked at Mason. Then he looked back at the car. Mason met his eyes. A small nod passed between them. Dominic walked away without a word. Isaac ran the full diagnostic suite at 7:30 and stood for a long time reading the results. Every pressure indicator was nominal. The fuel delivery variance was at 0.01% lower than the factory specification, lower than the car had ever recorded in actual testing. He called 2 members of his team over to confirm that he was reading the screen correctly. They confirmed it. Nobody knew what to say. Cameron was working late on the 5th floor when the repair happened. He saw it on the security feed, the timestamp, the access log, the unmistakable figure of the Level 2 maintenance mechanic moving through the restricted bay with the certainty of someone who had been there before, many times before. Cameron did not go to Evelyn that night. He waited until morning, collected the footage, organized the access records, and constructed the presentation with care. He left out the diagnostic results. He did not mention that the car now ran better than it ever had. He said, when he sat across from Evelyn in her office, "We have an internal security issue. An unauthorized employee accessed a restricted area and performed unsupervised intervention on our most critical asset without clearance of any kind." Evelyn watched the footage. The timestamp read 2:16 in the morning. The figure on the screen moved through the bay without hesitation, without confusion, without the tentative quality of someone doing something they had never done before. "Is the car functional?" she asked. "That isn't the point," Cameron said. "I'm asking anyway." Cameron straightened his folder. "The point is precedent. We are still under regulatory review from the Harmon incident. Any undocumented technical intervention, regardless of outcome,